Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome in, listeners, to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops. You could have been anywhere else in the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and we appreciate that. Happy belated Valentine's Day out there to everybody. Hope everybody delivered some candy or some flowers or a love note or something to those people or to that person that you care deeply about. And we love that you care so deeply about college basketball that you've tuned into this podcast. So thanks for doing that. Listeners, you won't be disappointed here. We have a special guest. We brought in John Gasaway from ESPN.com. John has a new book coming out. We'll talk about that a little bit in the podcast. So please give your ears and attention to that. If you do not subscribe to ESPN Plus, I suggest that you might look into that, especially during February and March, if for nothing else, to get John's ideology on his bubble watch that he mans for ESPN and his Player of the Year outlook and anything else that he might be paying attention to. Please go do that. You can check him out on Twitter at John Gasaway, capital J, capital G, please. A couple of things that John and I talked about on this particular podcast. We talked about the December Week 6 top 12 that usually contains our national champion. And guess what? Dayton and San Diego State weren't inside that top 12 during Week 6. So is that streak in peril? John and I talked about that. We talked a little BYU. We talked a little Gonzaga bigs and their demographic of what might be successful moving forward. We talked about a hatful of teams that we might want to pay attention to. We talked a little Player of the Year. We talked surprising player that has caught John's attention. We talked a little Ivy basketball. And then we ended up with a couple of fun questions, and I think you'll enjoy the last part of the podcast for sure. So again, if you're not giving John a follow on Twitter, please do, at John Gasaway. And if you really like what you're listening to here on the Screen Screener College Basketball Podcast, please don't forget the podcast to follow, at SDS Podcast. Efficiency of keystrokes, of course. Please, if you like what we're doing and you like the guests that we're bringing in, you like what Mike and I are talking about, leave a kind review on your podcast consumption vehicle of choice. Say nice things about our guests like John and say nice things about Mike because he's in charge of taking care of all of the podcast content here at the Screen Screener College Basketball Podcast. And please don't forget to give him a follow over at Randall Rant, capital R, on Twitter. He's insightful, entertaining, all in one nice, tidy little package. Hey, college basketball fans, let's enjoy our favorite part of the season coming up. And I hope that you enjoy the podcast that we put together this week with John Gasaway. Please enjoy. Cheers. Welcome in, listeners, to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where you can have anything you'd like in your ears. And we're glad that you chose to have us in your ears. And luckily, we have a special guest that'll be joining us, John Gasaway from ESPN. John, how's everything going over there? And how's the season been treating you so far?
The season's been a wild ride. I love it, and things are going really quite well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks for hopping on the pod a little bit. You know, with all your writing tasks over at ESPN, seems like you might have a new book on the horizon. We just want to say a thank you from college hoop fans everywhere for updating the Player of the Year updates and the Bubble Watch over at ESPN. Let's start with the daunting task of that book. John, provide the listeners a small taste of what might live in the pages of your upcoming project. You know, you can brag a little bit here without giving too much of the drama away if possible.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to plug my book. That's always appreciated, particularly to plug a book that I'm not done writing yet. So really getting in on the ground floor of promotion here. It's going to be a narrative of college basketball at Catholic colleges and universities, starting from George Mikan and Bob Cousy back in the day, all the way down to Mark Few and Jay Wright. And hey, who knows? Seton Hall might do something this year, or the Gonzaga might come through. So we don't know how the final chapter will look yet because the book is constantly being written by current events. I've had fun looking into that. I've learned a lot of things, not just about the particular histories of this or that program or Bill Russell at San Francisco or Villanova in the 70s, but just college basketball in general, how it evolved and what teams were doing and what the rules were at different parts of the game's history. And it's it's been a lot of fun. So the book will be out next year, and I hope you all rush out and buy one copy for yourselves and one copy for your history-conscious parent who will love it. It'll be a good buy, I promise.
I'm sure you'll deliver on that promise, and it sounds like the broad retrospective that you're providing there, John, seems like worth reading for any college hoops fan anywhere. So listeners, please be on the lookout for that upon its release. All right, John, let's talk the December list of title hopefuls. This season, as you mentioned prior, has been an absolute roller coaster ride. You took a look at that list, and there was 12 teams on the list, all worthy, maybe minus our current champ, UVA, due to their lack of impact on the offensive end. But two teams that have used this season to climb inside top 10 national rankings and inside top 10 KenPom rankings and other metrics are Dayton and San Diego State. How do you explain their rises? Should they now be included on this title-worthy list? And I guess a side thing, what do you do with Malachi Flynn on ball screens? He's ridiculous on that. He's indefensible.
Yeah, for listeners who may be unfamiliar with the incredible streak at risk here, every year since 2004, the national championship has been won by a team that was in the top 12 of the Week 6 AP poll, which tends to come out right after Thanksgiving in early December. So every year I say, okay, this is Week 6, and these are the 12 teams, and it need hardly be added that the streak is in peril this year for exactly the reasons you mentioned. Virginia is not looking like it's going to be a national title threat, famous last words, and they were ranked 9th back on Week 6.
Wow.
And exactly as you say, Dayton, San Diego State, nowhere to be seen. And you're probably talking about a number 1 and a number 2 seed there. So this streak will end someday. It could end this year. This would be a really ripe opportunity for it to end for the reasons you outline. The Aztecs and the Flyers are absolutely legit, if that even needs to be said, with their combined 1-loss record in mid-February. My goodness, obviously they are. If you've had the pleasure of watching Obi Toppin and his teammates, you know that they're just poetry in motion on offense. There's a reason they're winning these games. There's a reason their shooting is so accurate. They get the looks they want. And I was watching San Diego State extend its streak against Boise State not too long ago, and they do what no team has done in Mountain West history. I mean, these are tough places to play, venues like Boise and Wyoming and what
and
have
the Pit
you.
in New Mexico, right?
The Pit in New Mexico. These are vast distances with significant changes in altitude. No Mountain West team has ever run the table in conference play. Again, famous last words, but it's looking really, really likely that the Aztecs are absolutely a national title threat. That was nowhere to be seen in this top 12 we're talking about. But the good news for the streak is that characters like Kansas and Baylor and Gonzaga and Duke, they were there. Maryland as well, looking like a potential 2 seed. Oregon possibly a 3. They're all there. So there might be life in the old streak yet. We'll see what happens.
I love that it's to be determined with this particular season, and especially the disarray that's taken place early parts of this season. And we talked about Dayton a little bit. They're shooting 2s at a really envious level this season, and they're even shooting their 3s at 37-ish%. It seems efficient enough for a march and to success, especially with the 3-point line pushed back a touch. John, talk about the pushed back line a tiny bit, and do teams like maybe Auburn or Nova or Creighton that don't really care about the pushback line, are teams thinking twice about launching the ball from deep? And does the pushback line favor anybody, much like it's been favoring Dayton thus far this season?
Right. Yeah. Creighton looks fantastic. They've been sinking a high number of 3s, and it's not just coming from one Marcus Howard figure. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they just have ability and depth as it happens, and they get their 3s from a lot of different places on the court. I would throw BYU into that same kind of multi-headed monster mix. So, those are teams to fear any year. They're teams that can make teams that can make threes are a danger wherever the line happens to be. We saw that from Auburn last year. They got to within, one basket of the national title game because largely over the course of the season, largely because they were making threes and going at a fast pace. So that is definitely one way to skin this cat. And you might see one or more of the teams that you mentioned there in at the end of this. It is not, however, the only way. And we're seeing other teams that are just as elite that could be there at the end. Obviously, teams like Kansas and Baylor aren't necessarily known for their 3-point prowess, much less of their volume, but they look awful good lately. So that's what I love about the tournament. There's, you can't go to past national champions or even past Final Four teams and say, aha, this is the style that gets it done. People try to do that all the time. The actual course of basketball events confounds them every time. It's part of why I love March Madness.
Yeah, I think that speaks to why your book is going to be so interesting, because it'll probably highlight a bunch of those differences along the way to greatness and to titles. And, speaking of twos a little bit, Gonzaga has made the list of title hopefuls that we talked about previously. They're operating with 3 legit bigs, with Timmy, Tilly, and Petrusev. They're number 1 in offensive efficiency via Ken Pom. Dayton sits number 2. John, do you feel like the bigs that the Zags are going to go through and run some of their offense through have a legit opportunity to revisit the Final Four this season and maybe even win the whole thing? Is playing through your bigs maybe one of the advantages of the pushback 3-point line and the efficiency that they're operating on the offensive end?
Right. Thank you for bringing up the, high number of bigs in the rotation, because this always comes up in a Kansas context whenever poor David McCormick gets put on the floor. Right. And all of my fellow analytic devotees, come out of the woodwork as one and say, this is terrible. This is the worst thing it could ever have. Ruins the spacing, and Kansas just plays better per possession with just Doak as the only big, and here's the proof, down to the final decimal point. All of which is fine and true and analytically robust, but I always think, where were you people in 2015 when Kentucky played not 2, but 3 bigs and was, arguably the greatest college team we've ever seen? Maybe the problem is with, these particular 2 bigs versus, this particular going small configuration, and not with platonic ideal of those 2 things. And to bring this back to Gonzaga, they are making that case rather well. They've got at least 2. Depending on how you define a big, they've got at least 2 bigs on the floor, a very healthy percentage of the time. Not losing since November is a pretty good soundbite to put by your team. They seem to be doing okay. That's one of the things that has interested me over the years about the Zags is, their demographic MO stays pretty constant, and they recruit internationally, and they get some experienced transfers, and that's all to the good. They're always tweaking around the edges and making little changes in what they do, and we're seeing that again with the configuration they have this year. They are just absolutely monstrous, as you would guess, with all that size on the offensive glass, and that gives them a really large number of attempts. Not that they need them, because they shoot really well inside the arc in any event. So this is a good team that could win the national championship. They do not shoot a high number of threes, so maybe that means they're vulnerable to an opponent that packs the paint, or maybe it means this is a really consistent team that doesn't have to worry about going cold on one night because they don't really shoot threes anyway. That will be in the eye of the beholder. I love this annual exercise we go through where we doubt Gonzaga because they play in the West Coast Conference. And then, they did reach the national championship game in recent memory. I think they tend to be pretty good. I think they've earned the benefit of the doubt, despite the conference they play in. And also that conference might send 3 teams to the NCAA tournament. So it's pretty good in its own right. And the Zags are the best of that group.
No doubt, and I think they proved that with their road win against St. Mary's. But you're correct with bringing up BYU previously, and of course the Gales have played an unbelievably efficient level on the offensive end, even with their pace being super slow. John, I think is there another team that maybe we haven't talked about, or maybe is not on the national radar, that has crept into like your sneaky, interesting, off-center, like Final Four-ish consideration that we might be missing or dismissing for one reason or another? Do you have a team of intrigue in your eyes, like as we kind of roll into March and we get past Valentine's Day? Is there a team that's kind of caught your eye for one reason or another that maybe the rest of us aren't paying attention to?
Yeah, I've got a hatful of those teams. You'll have to stop me.
Okay, fair enough.
I'll limit myself to a couple, and one I've already named. BYU is shooting as well in West Coast Conference play as Villanova did in Big East play in 2018. I am not saying that means that the Cougars will win the national title because the Wildcats did. What I am saying is that is how well they're shooting right now. And at the time that Villanova was shooting that well, we all made a properly big deal out of it. And if you watch BYU play basketball, there's a reason that they are so good at making those shots. They surround Yoeli Childs with perimeter ability, and it's a good way to play. I like BYU and what they can get done on offense. I like Colorado a lot. I feel that they strangely aren't getting much notice, and that everybody is properly aware of Oregon, and everybody is properly aware of Arizona, perhaps because Nico Mannion's going to go really high in the draft. But I don't feel like people are understanding Colorado, which could turn out to be the best team in the Pac-12. We'll have to play a few games to find out.
Right.
I think the Buffaloes might be victim of our over-learning of good analytic lessons. Everybody goes to Ken Pom and looks at the Colorado page and sees, what their season-long adjusted efficiencies are.
Right.
But people are not understanding those are season long. And right now, in this moment, over a body of possessions in Pac-12 play, Colorado is just as good and probably better on offense than they are on defense. And their defense is recognized as being outstanding. So that's a really good combination. I like it. And I think that is a good example of an off-radar team that could, that I at least have my eye on.
All right. I like BYU. I agree with you on the shooting numbers, and you figure Coach Smith has really designed that offense to provide them with opportunity to make those shots. And Colorado also, one of the other factors that we have to equate into March success or success moving forward is like, do you have guys? And they have a great point guard, McKinley, right? They have a believable do everything wing in Bay. So it seems like Colorado might have some of the pieces as well. John, I think one of your requirements is letting the college basketball community know who some of these best players in the nation might be. Over at ESPN, you make a top 25 list and kind of extrapolate out who might be the favorite. It's really cloudy this year. Is there a clear favorite yet for the award? Is it still to be determined with about 25% of game inventory still remaining? Where do you stand as far as National Player of the Year, and who do you favor?
Well, there's two related questions here. Who will win it? It is kind of like doing bubble watching. Who will the committee select versus who should they select? Who will win it? I think that Marcus Howard would have good inside track. He's a senior, and the voters tend to like, in years where there's not a Zion figure, to be sure, the voters will tend to like more veteran players. And he scores a ton of points. Now, Luka Garza is coming up fast on that same, I score a ton of points. I think I was counting it for Overwatch, and I think he's up to 135 over the last 5 games. So, he's scoring some points, and that's with a rock fight thrown into that mix in the most recent outing at Minnesota. So he's definitely in that same mix of high scoring veteran. He's a junior. So those would be some likely directions to turn. I think that the unfortunate thing with an outstanding Kansas player for national recognition is that there's too many outstanding Kansas players, and the voters won't necessarily. It's kind of like when you've got multiple Best Supporting Actress nominees from the same film. The voters won't know. Do we go with Devin Dotson, or do we go with Doak, or for that matter, do we go with Marcus Garrett, consensus best defender in the country, who just went nuts and looked like Pistol Pete Maravich on shooting threes. If he can keep doing that, he is the National Player of the Year. But I think they might split that vote. And I guess I would give the odds mostly to Marcus Howard and Luka Garza. In the past, I've paid tribute and even rated number one Obi Toppin, but I think it'll just be too tough a pull for a player from the Atlantic 10 to win the national honor.
I'm kind of with you there. I think as impactful as he is, and as much as he's expanded his game, we're talking Obi here, out to the 3-point line. When he gets the ball inside and does a drop step, he looks NBA-ish on every possession and every dunk that he has there. I mean, his second jump is through the roof. I think it's going to translate just fine to the next level. But John, we talk a little Obi. You talk Marcus Howard. We can throw Vernon Carey into that conversation. But here's what I think we want to let the listeners in on it, and maybe dig a little bit further back into your brain, into your mind. Allow the listeners to know a player that's caught your eye that may not be in that Player of the Year conversation with their play over the season thus far, whether it be with their numbers, their metric, or just their overall style of play that you've really enjoyed viewing this season, a player that might be hiding behind the curtain a little bit, and somebody that listeners might tune into and pay attention to come March that we don't have the spotlight on right this certain second.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the player that comes to mind first is sufficiently obscure. I think that listeners might say, no fair, we know about this guy.
Okay, fair.
But the thing is, I just really enjoy watching this guy play, so I'm going to plug him anyway. And I am speaking of Oscar Tshiebwe with West Virginia, who is 6'9", 260 pounds of freshman activity and basketball entertainment. He might be the best offensive rebounder in the country. He is a really good rim defender, arguably better than his numbers show, because he's alongside another good rim defender in Derek Culver. If he had solitary possession of the paint, we'd probably see that block percentage inch up a little bit. He is a big part of not very good West Virginia offense already as a 6'9" freshman. So I like watching him play. I love watching him play against the opposing bigs the Big 12 can throw at him, particularly from Kansas and from Baylor. Those are some grown man collisions. And selfishly, I want West Virginia to hang around for a second weekend in the NCAA tournament, because I would just love to see what Tshiebwe could do in a win-or-go-home setting. He is highly entertaining to my eyes.
It seems like he's a slightly more skilled and longer Kanate, and Kanate provided us with some of the best.
Right, exactly, and he was highly entertaining. Yeah, some of those blocks he did were incredible. Yeah, so that's a good call. Exactly. Yeah,
the two-handed blocks that he would have.
Yeah,
were absolutely ridiculous, and I'm totally with you with Oscar being that exact same way. All right, that's a great call. I'm totally with you on that. All right, let's talk a little Ivy here, John. Being an Ivy League school, I guess the question is, do you have an issue with the Ivy and the red shirt / grad student current rule? And one of your colleagues, Jeff Borzello, wrote about this a little bit. Do you think the league might revisit this legislation to keep some of its higher profile players around? Seth Towns from Harvard, Mike Smith from Columbia, etc. The Ivy never had a conference tournament until a couple of years ago, and they revisited that rule, and now they have a 4-team invite. So do you think this rule might be altered to keep some of those higher level players around that the Ivy is garnering year after year? Do you have a feel on this unique rule in college hoops? And maybe throw in your thoughts on Yale. They have an outside shot and an at-large appearance with a top 50 net rating. What's your feel on the Ivy with their rule on grad transfers and redshirting? And then maybe talk a little Yale or whoever else you might have caught your eye in the Ivy.
Yeah, I have zero issues with the Ivy in terms of the degree of accommodation that they make to quote unquote big time revenue sports, because that degree of accommodation will always be very, very modest, and that is one of the viewing pleasures of the Ivy, is to see people run around irate as though the Ivy basketball is suddenly going to become the equivalent of something like SEC football. I mean, it's just not even in the same building. And I think that, I trust the Ivy to make those calibrations up to and including, GASP, a postseason tournament for the men's basketball teams. If I am given a moment at Free Speech Corner on the topic of Ivy basketball, I think I would devote that 60 seconds to finding a good neutral floor for the Ivy tournament and keeping it there. But other than that, it's all good by me. Yale's at-large chances look significantly dimmer now that the Bulldogs lost at Penn. That is a second Ivy loss, and not that, beyond the pale or rules you out categorically. It's just that given this particular profile, even with the nice net ranking, which, by the way, barring a collapse, is going to stay good, it's just feeling like one of those examples where, and we saw this last year in year one of the net, there's plenty of examples of teams that had good net rankings that didn't get picked. The committee is not going to go, nor should they, straight down the list of the net rankings and pick their at-large teams that way. It looks like Yale, barring a tremendous resurgence followed by a loss in the Ivy tournament, it looks like they will fall prey to that. I wrote in Bubble Watch, their chances of simply winning the automatic bid, even though the tournaments at Harvard this year are much, much greater than somehow playing three-dimensional chess on their way into an at-large bid. It would be easier just to win Ivy Madness.
I'm totally with you on that. I just thought I'd throw it out there for some giggles and see what your thoughts were. But I had to ask. We are a pro Ivy podcast here over the Screener. All right, John, let's get you out of here on four very simple, quick ones. Thank you for the time. And again, please give John a follow at John Gasaway on Twitter. You can find all of his work over at ESPN. And if you are not a subscriber to ESPN Plus, John just might be the reason that you subscribe to that service, because his work is that important, especially leading into March. You want to be up to date with everything that might be happening in the college hoops world. And John's mind gives you a keen insight onto what's happening into that college basketball world that you're going to pay attention to next month. All right, John, give the listeners a little personal stuff here. Tunes. What's been on the playlist this season when you're gathering intel for your content, or maybe trying to put together a couple of odds and ends for your book that you got upcoming?
First of all, thank you for the promo that on subscribing. That was outstanding. I'm just going to print that on a T-shirt and wear that. That's great.
I kind of like that. I'll take one of those T-shirts, please.
It's all about selling the subs. So thank you for that. Musically, I've been going old school. I love the ability just to shout out loud what I want, and my electronic device of choice responds to my commands. So this is a great world we live in. So I've been going into a heavy magnetic fields phase, and not only their standards like Papa Was a Rodeo and what have you, but great cover versions of the same. So, with cover versions, I stumble across new artists that I didn't know about through the gateway drug of a song that I already know is good. So that's what I've been exploring there lately.
And I always think there's nothing wrong with a great cover version of a song that you really relate to, and then it brings you to that new artist, and then it lets you explore the catalog and the content of that new artist, and then you can make a decision on that new artist and say a cover version of a song. Right?
Or a cover version of a song that you, in your snobbery, dismiss the original version of. Luna has an amazing cover of "Sweet Child of Mine," right. And it's a way that I can play it, and I'm still cool, but I'm listening to "Sweet Child of Mine." So cover versions are the best.
Nothing wrong with a little GNR. All right, John, who do you trust? We talked to a number of different players, but if you had one player in the nation to trust with a last-second winning possession, who is that one player that you would put your trust in the timeout as a coach?
That's an excellent question. Hadn't thought of that. I think that, and it's hard to remove it from the context. My first thought in answering that is to say Devin Dotson, but then when I probe that answer, it's because he's got Udoko Ezebukwe on his team, and he'll probably lob it to Doak and he'll dunk it. So I'm not sure that's really answering the spirit of your question. But Dotson,
we said possession, not shot.
He is able to play at a higher speed than most. He makes good decisions, and he's insanely talented. So I think I'll stick with that, even though I was kind of cheating a bit because he's surrounded by equally talented teammates. But I'll go with Dotson, and that'll make KU listeners happy.
I think so. And you know what? It's nice that he's one of the guys that came back, and you're seeing what makes him so talented. You talk about his pace of play. His pace of play with the ball is outrageous. All right, second to last one, tastes. Any solid craft beers that you've come across this season that you'd like to share with the listeners?
No, none. I've been, beer. It's like we sleep in May. We have beer in April.
I think we can just leave that there. Put that on a T-shirt, John.
No, I mean, seriously, Friday night was Valentine's, and I am happy to say I am married. So, and there were Yale played Friday night, and I conscientiously did not watch it. It was Valentine's Day, but there are not many nights off in the bubble watch industry in February. So I am looking forward to being able to answer your question with expertise. Let's revisit that come mid-April, and I'll probably be sipping as I answer it, and I'll look forward to that.
All right, that sounds fantastic. And I'm also going to say thank you for keeping your mind clean for the listeners and the readers out there. That's fantastic. And last one, road trip, travels. Where you plan to see a big game in person come March or maybe later on this season? Do you have anything that you're looking forward to seeing in person, John?
Yeah, I am advantageously located for NCAA tournament play in the Big Apple. Those decisions are still being negotiated as we speak. For that matter, I'm advantageously situated for conference tournament play in the Big Apple. Those decisions are also working themselves out. But the spectacle of the game is it always delivers, and I don't want to say it doesn't matter who's playing, but when you're watching games in late February or early March in person, and assuming you're not, slumming and conscientiously doing games that actually do not matter to the NCAA tournament, it's the product is always there, and I look forward to sampling it. No concrete plans set in stone, and I also enjoy the other extreme of taking it all in through technology with multiple games going in at once, and I've been known to do that on occasion. So it's all good, and I simply seek the ways that deliver the most product to my eyeballs, whether remotely or in person.
Well, efficiency is the key, and I think during March, if you're going to try to be efficient to have your income of games provide the information that you need for your work, and I think that sounds perfectly logical.
Right.
Thank you.
One line I will draw in the sand is the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. You cannot attend in person. That is the worst misstep you can take. I mean, there's just too much to keep track of, even with the best of technology. So, I mean, if you're trying to do that remotely at a game site, you're doomed. So I salute my employer. I hope you're listening, employer, for calling me to Bristol for the first weekend for every NCAA tournament, and not sending me to Orlando or Boise or San Jose or some such place, because you need everything that technology can give you the first weekend.
Well, hopefully your employer, ESPN, is smart enough to know that that's how you're going to disseminate all the information properly and get it out to the listeners and to the readers properly. Obviously, they'd make a smart choice there. You'd hope, right, John? I mean, that sounds perfectly logical.
My employer is smart. Let me be on the record as saying,
fair enough.
My employer is very smart, and I'm very happy with the smartness displayed therein.
Excellent, John. Thanks for a couple minutes here, and thanks for breaking down a number of things for us, college basketball wise. We hope that you enjoy taking in all of the conference tournaments, especially that first weekend, and we look forward to all of your work over at ESPN. So thank you very much. And again, if you're not giving John a follow, please give him a follow at John Gasaway on Twitter. And of course, find all of his information, work, and intelligent work over at ESPN. John, thank you again, and enjoy the weekend, okay?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Oh, of course. Cheers.
I'm addicted to the appetite. It's a